My son's wife snatched the mic and shouted, "This old parasite thinks money makes her important." So I covered the full tab and canceled the mortgage and all the benefits before they even notice. But let me tell you how we got there. I had been planning Michael's 40th birthday party for weeks. Every detail was perfect. The catering from his favorite Italian restaurant, the decorations in navy blue and gold, his preferred colors, and even the guest list carefully curated to include everyone he cared about. I wanted this to be special for him. After all, he was my only son, and despite everything, I still loved him deeply. The venue was the country club where I had been a member for 15 years. I chose the garden terrace because Michael always loved outdoor gatherings. The flowers were in full bloom, and the evening light created the perfect ambiance. I had spent $3,000 on this party. But seeing Michael happy would be worth every penny. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, arrived fashionably late as always. She wore a tight red dress that seemed more appropriate for a nightclub than a family celebration. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. She looked beautiful. I had to admit, but there was something cold about her beauty. Something calculating. She barely acknowledged me when she walked in. No hug, no thank you for organizing the party, just a quick nod and immediately went to mingle with the younger guests. I watched her laugh loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny, touch arms unnecessarily during conversations, and constantly check her phone. This was typical Brittany behavior, but tonight it stung more than usual. Michael seemed genuinely happy. He hugged me when he arrived and thanked me for the party. For a moment, I felt like I had my son back. The son who used to call me every Sunday, who would bring me flowers on Mother's Day, who once told me I was the strongest woman he knew. But that moment was brief because Brittany quickly pulled him away to introduce him to some people I didn't recognize. The evening progressed smoothly at first. Guests enjoyed the food, the music was perfect, and people seemed to be having a good time. I mingled quietly, making sure everyone had what they needed. I was proud of how everything turned out. The speeches were scheduled for later, and I had prepared a few words about Michael's childhood and how proud I was of the man he had become. Around 9 o'clock, as the main course was being served, Brittany approached the small stage where the DJ had set up the microphone. I assumed she was going to give a toast to her husband. My heart actually warmed a little, thinking maybe she would finally show some appreciation for the effort I had put into this evening. She tapped the microphone, and the conversations gradually died down. Everyone turned their attention to her. She was smiling, but there was something unsettling about that smile, something predatory. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my amazing husband," she began, her voice carrying easily across the terrace. "Michael deserves all the love and attention tonight because he's such a wonderful man." I smiled, thinking maybe I had misjudged her intentions. Then her tone shifted slightly. "Of course, we have to thank someone special for making this party possible. Someone who never lets us forget how generous she is." My stomach began to tighten. The way she emphasized generous didn't sound like gratitude. "Eleanor thinks that throwing money around makes her important to this family," Brittany continued, her voice getting louder and more venomous. "But we all know the truth. This old parasite thinks money makes her important." The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire terrace went silent. I could feel every pair of eyes turning toward me. My face burned with embarrassment and shock. I couldn't breathe properly. The woman I had welcomed into my family, whose wedding I had helped pay for, whose mortgage I had been covering for 2 years, had just called me a parasite in front of 50 people. I looked toward Michael, desperately hoping he would stand up for me, tell his wife that her words were inappropriate and hurtful, but he just stood there, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. He avoided my eyes completely. Brittany wasn't finished. "Some people think that writing checks gives them the right to control everyone around them. But money can't buy love or respect. Those have to be earned." The irony of her words was almost laughable. She was talking about earning respect while publicly humiliating the woman who had been supporting her family financially for years. I felt tears threatening to spill, but I refused to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I walked calmly to the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and returned to my table. My hands were shaking, but I kept my expression neutral. People were whispering now, and I could feel their stares burning into me. The party continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations were more subdued, and people kept glancing in my direction. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few appeared to be enjoying the drama. I sat there for another hour, maintaining my composure, greeting guests who approached me, and acting as if nothing had happened. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The love I had been clinging to, the hope that things could improve between us, the belief that family bonds were sacred, all of it crumbled in that moment. Brittany had finally shown her true colors, and Michael had chosen his side by remaining silent. As the evening wound down, I quietly settled the bill with the country club staff. $3,000 for the privilege of being humiliated in public. I left without saying goodbye to anyone. Michael didn't even notice I was gone. Driving home that night, I felt strangely calm. The hurt was there, deep and sharp. But underneath it was something else. Something cold and determined. Brittany thought she had won tonight. She thought she had put me in my place. But she had no idea what she had just unleashed. At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered, 7 days to vanish from my house. So I stayed silent. And the next day she found out the house wasn't hers when she received a letter from my lawyer. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story is so much more than that moment. I never thought I'd be standing over my son's casket at 68, watching strangers cry more genuinely than his own wife. David had been my everything for 32 years. After his father died when David was just 15, it had been just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts at the diner, took night classes to become a bookkeeper, sacrificed vacations and new clothes, all so he could have the life I never had. The funeral home smelled like cheap lilies and disinfectant. I stood there in my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my husband's funeral 13 years ago, watching people I barely recognized file past David's casket. His colleagues from the engineering firm, neighbors who never bothered to speak to us before, distant relatives who suddenly appeared when death made the headlines. But it was Melissa who made my blood run cold. She stood at the front of the room like a grieving widow from a movie, dabbing her eyes with tissues that never seemed to get wet. Her black dress probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. The pearl necklace David had bought her for their 5th anniversary caught the funeral home's harsh fluorescent light as she accepted condolences with practiced grace. "Thank you so much for coming," she'd say, her voice breaking at just the right moments. David would have been so touched. I wanted to scream. David would have been horrified by this circus. My son was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who preferred small gatherings and genuine conversations. This wasn't honoring his memory, it was Melissa's performance. I'd been watching her perform for 8 years now. When David first brought her home, I tried so hard to like her. She was beautiful, certainly, with her blonde hair always perfectly styled and her clothes that never seemed to wrinkle. She had this way of smiling that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room, at least until someone more interesting walked by. "Mom, isn't she wonderful?" David had asked after that first dinner, his eyes shining with the kind of love that makes you blind to red flags. I'd nodded and smiled because what else could I do? My son was happy, or at least he seemed happy. But even then, something felt wrong. The way she'd looked around our modest home, her smile faltering for just a moment when she saw the worn furniture and faded wallpaper. The way she'd pushed food around her plate without really eating, as if our simple pot roast wasn't good enough for her refined palate. But David was glowing, so I kept my doubts to myself. That was my first mistake. The second was believing her when she said she wanted us to be a family. "Mrs. Morrison," she'd said, taking my hands in hers after David proposed, "I hope you know how much I want you in our lives. David talks about you constantly. You raised such an amazing man." I'd felt tears spring to my eyes. After years of it being just David and me, the thought of having a daughter, of expanding our little family, felt like a gift I didn't deserve. How naive I was. The changes started small. First, it was Sunday dinners. "We're just so busy with wedding planning," Melissa would say when I called to confirm our usual get-together. "Maybe next week?" Next week became next month, then eventually never. Then it was the phone calls. David used to call me every other day just to chat about work or ask for my advice on something. Those calls became shorter, less frequent. When I asked him about it, he'd look uncomfortable and say something about Melissa needing more of his attention as they adjusted to married life. "You understand, don't you, Mom?" he'd ask, and I'd nod because what else could I do? After they married, things got worse. The house that David and I had bought together when he graduated college, the house where I'd helped with the down payment using every penny of my late husband's life insurance, suddenly became their house. Melissa had opinions about everything, from the color of the kitchen walls to the furniture in the living room. "This couch is so outdated," she'd say, wrinkling her nose at the sofa where David and I had spent countless evenings watching movies. "We really need to modernize this place." Within 6 months, everything I'd chosen, everything that held memories of David's childhood and our life together, was gone. Replaced with expensive furniture that looked beautiful but felt cold. The house began to feel like a museum instead of a home. But the worst part was watching David change. My son had always been thoughtful, always considerate of my feelings. But gradually, he stopped asking my opinion about things. He stopped sharing his problems with me. When I'd try to talk to him about work or his dreams, or anything meaningful, Melissa would somehow appear and steer the conversation elsewhere. "David's been working so hard," she'd say, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "He doesn't need to think about stressful things when he's trying to relax," as if talking to his mother was stressful. I started to feel like a stranger in my own son's life. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where I felt like an unwelcome guest. Melissa would monopolize conversations, talking about her job at the marketing firm, their vacation plans, their future plans that somehow never included me. But I told myself it was normal. Young couples needed space to build their own lives. I was being sensitive, maybe even jealous of having to share my son's attention. I should have trusted my instincts. The final blow came when they decided I should move out of the house. "It's not that we don't want you here," David had said, avoiding my eyes as Melissa sat beside him on their expensive new couch. "It's just that we're thinking about starting a family and we'll need the space." My heart shattered. The spare bedroom where I'd been sleeping since they took over the master bedroom, the room that had been mine for 15 years, was suddenly an inconvenience. "Where would I go?" I'd asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There are lovely senior communities nearby," Melissa had chimed in, her voice bright and helpful. "Places where you could make friends your own age, have activities designed for people in your stage of life." Your stage of life, as if I was already dead. But David nodded along, and I realized my son, my baby boy who I'd raised alone, who I'd sacrificed everything for, was choosing her over me. So I moved out, found a small apartment across town, told everyone it was my choice, that I wanted my independence. I smiled and pretended it was what I wanted while my heart broke a little more each day. That was 3 years ago. Now, standing at his funeral, watching Melissa play the perfect widow, all those years of hurt and resentment crystallized into something harder, colder. As the service ended and people began to file out, Melissa approached me. Her makeup was still perfect, I noticed. Not a smudge despite all the supposed crying. "Margaret," she said, her voice soft and sad, "thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to my own son's funeral." "Of course," I managed to say. She moved closer, and for a moment I thought she might actually embrace me, might show some genuine emotion. Instead, she leaned in close to my ear, close enough that no one else could hear. 7 days, she whispered, her voice cold as winter. 7 days to get your things and vanish from my house. I won't have you lurking around, making things difficult. I felt the air leave my lungs. Even now, even at David's funeral, she couldn't let me grieve in peace. But I didn't react. I didn't scream or cry or slap her like every instinct in my body wanted to. Instead, I looked at her with the calmest expression I could manage and said nothing. She pulled back, clearly expecting some kind of outburst. When I remained silent, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Did you hear me?" she hissed. I nodded once, then turned and walked away, because Melissa had no idea what was coming for her. She had no idea that my silence wasn't submission, it was preparation. The week following Michael's party, I did something I had never done before. I started paying attention, really paying attention. Instead of making excuses for Brittany's behavior or trying to rationalize Michael's distance, I began documenting everything with the cold objectivity of someone gathering evidence. It started with a phone call on Tuesday morning. I called Michael to thank him for including me in his birthday celebration, even though I was the one who had organized and paid for it. The conversation was brief and awkward. He thanked me quickly, mentioned how busy work was, and said he would call me later in the week. Before hanging up, I heard Brittany's voice in the background saying, "Tell her we'll call her back," as if I were some telemarketer rather than his mother. He didn't call back that week. On Thursday, I decided to test something. I called their house phone instead of Michael's cell, knowing that Brittany often answered. She picked up on the third ring, her voice immediately shifting from warm to cold when she realized it was me. "Oh, hi, Eleanor. Michael's not here right now." "That's fine," I said, keeping my tone pleasant. "I was actually calling to invite you both for dinner this Sunday. I thought I could make Michael's favorite pot roast." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her thinking of an excuse. "That's sweet of you, but we already have plans this weekend. You know how busy we are. What about next weekend, then?" Another pause. "I'll have to check our calendar and get back to you." She never got back to me, but more importantly, I discovered something interesting. After hanging up, I called Michael's cell phone. He answered immediately. "Mom, what's up? I was just calling to invite you and Brittany for dinner this Sunday." "Oh, that sounds nice, but Brittany mentioned you called earlier and that we already had plans." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its efficiency. Brittany had intercepted my invitation and declined on both their behalf without even consulting him. How many other conversations had been filtered through her? How many times had she spoken for Michael without his knowledge? I started making more calls, varying the times and approaches. When I called during the day, Brittany almost always answered, and Michael was either busy, in the shower, or just stepped out. When I called in the evenings after 7, Michael usually answered himself. The pattern was clear. Brittany was controlling access to my son during the hours when she was home. But the real revelation came when I ran into Sarah, Michael's college friend, at the grocery store on Saturday. Sarah had been at the birthday party and had witnessed Brittany's public attack on me. She approached me hesitantly, clearly unsure whether to mention what had happened. "Eleanor, I just wanted to say that what happened at Michael's party was completely inappropriate," she said, glancing around nervously. "I was shocked by how she spoke to you." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It was certainly unexpected." Sarah hesitated, then leaned closer. "Can I tell you something? This isn't the first time I've heard Brittany talk about you that way." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "At their housewarming party last year, a group of us were talking about family relationships. Someone mentioned how close they were with their mother-in-law, and Brittany laughed and said that some older women don't know when to back off. She said you were constantly trying to insert yourself into their lives, and that it was exhausting having to manage your neediness." The words stung, but I wasn't entirely surprised. Did Michael hear this? Sarah nodded uncomfortably. He was standing right there. He didn't say anything to contradict her, just sort of nodded along. I think everyone felt awkward about it. So Michael had been present when his wife disparaged me to their friends, and he had said nothing. Just like at the birthday party, he had chosen silence over defending his mother. "There's something else," Sarah continued, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "A few months ago, Brittany told me that you had been calling them multiple times a day and showing up at their house unannounced. She said they were considering asking you to give them some space because your behavior was becoming concerning." I felt my face burn with anger and humiliation. "That's not true. I speak to Michael maybe once a week, and I never visit without calling first." "I figured there had to be more to the story," Sarah said quickly. It didn't sound like the Eleanor I know, but she was very convincing, and she seemed genuinely frustrated about it. After Sarah left, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Brittany hadn't just been undermining me within the family. She had been spreading lies about me to their entire social circle. She was painting me as a needy, intrusive mother-in-law who couldn't respect boundaries. The irony was devastating. While I had been carefully limiting my contact with them to avoid seeming pushy, Brittany was telling people that I was overwhelming them with attention. While I had been bending over backward to give them space, she was portraying me as someone who didn't understand personal boundaries. I drove home and immediately went to my computer. I needed to document everything while it was fresh in my memory. I created a spreadsheet with dates, times, and details of every interaction I'd had with Michael and Brittany over the past month. The pattern that emerged was damning. In 4 weeks, I had initiated contact with them 6 times, 3 phone calls, 2 text messages, and 1 dinner invitation. Michael had initiated contact with me exactly once, a brief text thanking me for a birthday gift I had sent. Yet according to Brittany's narrative, I was the one who couldn't give them space. I thought about all the invitations that had been declined, all the plans that had been mysteriously canceled at the last minute, all the times Michael had seemed distant or distracted during our conversations. How much of that had been orchestrated by Brittany? The next revelation came from an unexpected source. My hairdresser, Linda, mentioned that she had also done Brittany's hair for a wedding they had both attended last month. During the appointment, Brittany had apparently spent considerable time complaining about her mother-in-law. She said you were always trying to buy their love with expensive gifts and that it made them uncomfortable, Linda told me as she worked on my highlights. She said you acted like you could control them just because you helped them financially sometimes. There it was again. The narrative that my generosity was actually manipulation, that my attempts to help were really attempts to control. Brittany had twisted every act of love into something sinister and self-serving. She also said that Michael felt guilty about how dependent they were on your help, but that they needed the money too much to tell you to stop, Linda continued. She made it sound like you were taking advantage of their financial situation to force a relationship. The conversation left me reeling. According to Brittany's version of events, I was financially coercing them into spending time with me. Never mind that they had asked for help with every single expense. Never mind that I had never attached conditions to my assistance or demanded anything in return except the opportunity to remain part of my son's life. But the most disturbing part was the suggestion that Michael felt guilty about accepting my help. If that were true, why had he never said anything to me directly? Why continue accepting money while privately resenting the person providing it? I started thinking about our recent interactions differently. Was the tension I had sensed really about financial obligation rather than Brittany's influence? Had my attempts to help actually driven a wedge between us rather than bringing us closer together? The questions tormented me for days. I replayed conversations, looking for signs I had missed. I analyzed every gift I had given, every check I had written, wondering if they had been received with gratitude or resentment. The answer came when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Brittany and someone I assumed was her sister. I had stopped by their house to drop off some documents Michael needed for his taxes, a rare unscheduled visit that I had called ahead to arrange. Michael wasn't home yet, but Brittany had said I could wait for him. While she was in the kitchen making coffee, her phone rang. She answered without checking who was calling, and I could hear her voice clearly from the living room where I was sitting. "You should have seen her face when I called her a parasite," Brittany was saying, laughing. She looked like she was going to cry right there in front of everyone. It was perfect. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still and listen. I know, she continued. But she had it coming. Do you know she actually expected us to be grateful that she paid for the party? Like, we're supposed to worship her because she has money. There was a pause while the other person spoke, then Brittany laughed again. Michael was so embarrassed, but he'll get over it. He knows I'm right about her. She's been using money to control us for years, and it's time someone called her out on it. Another pause. The best part is that she'll probably still keep paying for everything because she's so desperate to stay relevant in Michael's life. These older women are so pathetic. They can't accept that their children have moved on. I felt nauseous listening to her casual cruelty, but I needed to hear everything. Trust me, this is just the beginning, Brittany continued. I'm going to make sure she understands exactly where she stands in this family. Michael might be too weak to set boundaries with her, but I'm not. When I heard her footsteps approaching, I quickly picked up a magazine and pretended to read. She entered the room with 2 cups of coffee, smiling as if she hadn't just been discussing her plans to systematically destroy my relationship with my son. Michael should be home soon, she said sweetly, handing me a cup. I hope you don't mind waiting. I accepted the coffee with steady hands and a calm smile, even though every instinct screamed at me to confront her immediately. But I had learned something valuable from years of dealing with Brittany's subtle cruelty. Direct confrontation would only give her ammunition to use against me later. Instead, I sat there sipping coffee and making pleasant small talk with the woman who had just revealed her true intentions. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully humiliated me into submission. But as I sat there listening to her talk about her weekend plans and Michael's work schedule, I was actually calculating something else entirely. I was thinking about mortgage payments and car loans, about co-signed credit cards and business investments. I was thinking about exactly how much power I actually held in this situation. Brittany was right about one thing. I did have money, and money was power, but she had made a crucial miscalculation. She assumed that my generosity came from desperation, that I would continue to tolerate her abuse because I was afraid of losing access to Michael. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. I left Brittany and Michael's house that afternoon with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The conversation I had overheard wasn't just enlightening, it was liberating. For the first time, I knew exactly who I was dealing with and exactly what needed to be done. That evening, I sat at my dining room table with a cup of tea and a stack of financial documents. Every loan agreement, every mortgage paper, every receipt and bank statement from the past 5 years was spread out before me like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. The numbers were staggering when I added them all together. $197,432. That's what my love for Michael had cost me over 5 years of marriage to Brittany. But as I examined each document more carefully, I realized that these weren't just gifts or acts of generosity. They were legally binding agreements that gave me significant leverage. The house was the most important piece. I had co-signed the mortgage and was listed as a joint owner with 30% equity. More importantly, I had been making the monthly payments for the past 3 years, something I could prove with bank records. According to the terms of our agreement, if I stopped making payments, the entire loan would become immediately due. The car loans were simpler, but equally powerful. Both vehicles were financed through my credit union, with me as the primary borrower and Michael as a co-signer. The cars were registered in my name as collateral for the loans. I could repossess them anytime I chose to stop making payments. Then there were the credit cards, 3 different accounts that I paid monthly, all with my name as the primary account holder and both Michael and Brittany as authorized users. I had added them to help establish Brittany's credit history when they first married, thinking I was doing something helpful for their future. The business loan was perhaps the most complicated. Michael's consulting firm had been struggling for the past 2 years, and I had provided a $50,000 loan to keep it operational. We had signed a formal promissory note with specific repayment terms. Michael hadn't made a single payment yet, which meant the loan was technically in default. As I reviewed each document, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: control. Brittany thought she held all the power in this relationship because she controlled access to Michael. She thought she could humiliate me publicly and face no consequences because I was desperate to maintain my connection to my son. But money, as Brittany herself had pointed out so eloquently, was power. And I had been giving away my power for 5 years without even realizing it. I started with the smallest steps first. On Monday morning, I called my credit union and requested new credit cards for all 3 accounts. The representative explained that as the primary account holder, I could remove authorized users and issue new cards at any time. The old cards would be deactivated within 24 hours. Next, I called my insurance company and removed both vehicles from my policy. Since I was the legal owner of both cars, I had every right to make this decision. The insurance would be canceled at the end of the current billing cycle, which was the following Friday. The mortgage was more complicated, but my attorney, Robert Michaels, had been handling my financial affairs for 15 years and understood the situation immediately when I called him. "Eleanor, are you sure about this?" he asked after I explained what I wanted to do. "This is going to create significant financial hardship for Michael and his wife." "Robert, I've been creating financial ease for them for 5 years," I replied calmly. "It's time they learn to manage their own obligations. The legal process will take some time," he warned. "But if you want to withdraw from the mortgage agreement, you'll need to provide 90 days notice. After that, they'll need to refinance the house in their own names or face foreclosure." "Draw up the papers," I said. "I want everything handled legally and professionally." "What about the business loan?" "That's already in default." I thought about Michael's consulting firm, the company he had been so excited to start 3 years ago. I had believed in his vision and wanted to support his dreams of independence, but supporting someone's dreams was different from enabling their irresponsibility. "I want that called in immediately," I decided. "If he can't make arrangements to repay within 30 days, I'll accept his business assets as payment." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, this is a very aggressive approach. Have you considered talking to Michael directly about your concerns?" I almost laughed. "Robert, my son stood by and watched his wife call me a parasite in front of 50 people. He's had plenty of opportunities to address his concerns with me directly. Now I'm addressing mine." The next step was harder, but necessary. I called my financial advisor and requested that Michael be removed as the beneficiary of my life insurance policy and retirement accounts. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reality. If Michael was comfortable allowing his wife to treat me with such disrespect, then he clearly didn't value our relationship enough to warrant inheriting my life's work. Each phone call felt like cutting away a piece of dead tissue. It should have been painful, but instead I felt lighter with every conversation. For 5 years, I had been pouring my resources into a black hole, hoping that my generosity would somehow translate into love and respect. Now I was finally acknowledging that love and respect couldn't be purchased. The most difficult part was the waiting. All of these changes would take time to process, and I knew that Michael and Brittany would be unaware of what was happening until the consequences started to manifest. I had to resist the urge to call Michael and warn him, to give him one last chance to make things right, but I knew from experience that warnings would be useless. Michael had chosen his side years ago when he started allowing Brittany to dictate the terms of our relationship. He had chosen his side again at the birthday party, when he stood silent while his wife publicly humiliated me. The first sign that my plan was working came on Thursday, when Michael called me in a panic. "Mom, something's wrong with our credit cards," he said, his voice tight with stress. "They were all declined today when Brittany tried to use them for groceries." I kept my voice calm and concerned. "Oh my, that does sound strange. Have you called the credit card company?" "Brittany's on the phone with them now, but they're saying the cards have been deactivated. They told her to contact the primary account holder, but that's you." "How odd," I said, injecting just the right amount of confusion into my voice. "I haven't done anything different. Maybe there's been some kind of fraud alert triggered? Could you call them and sort this out? We have bills due this week, and we were counting on those cards." The phrase, "we were counting on those cards," said everything I needed to know about their financial situation. They weren't just using my credit occasionally. They were dependent on it for their basic expenses. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "I'll call them first thing tomorrow morning and see what's going on." "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. This is just really stressful timing with everything else we have going on." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen smiling for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, when the insurance cancellations took effect, Michael would have even more reason to feel stressed. By the end of the month, when the mortgage notice arrived, he would begin to understand exactly what his silence had cost him. The weekend after the credit cards were canceled was blissfully quiet. I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market, something I hadn't done in months because I was always too busy managing Michael and Brittany's latest crisis. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table and actually enjoyed a leisurely lunch at a cafe without checking my phone every 5 minutes. But I knew the calm wouldn't last long. Monday morning brought the first real wave of panic. My phone started ringing at 7:30, Michael's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came at 8:15, then another at 9. By noon, I had 6 missed calls and 3 increasingly frantic voicemail messages. The first message was controlled. "Mom, could you call me back? We really need to sort out this credit card situation." The second showed cracks. "Mom, this is becoming urgent. Brittany tried to buy groceries again today, and the cards still aren't working. We have bills due tomorrow." The third message revealed true desperation. "Mom, please call me back. I don't understand what's happening, but we're in serious trouble here. The insurance company called and said our car coverage was canceled. This has to be some kind of mistake." I listened to each message twice, noting the progression from mild concern to genuine fear. This was exactly what I had hoped for. Not the panic itself, but the recognition that their comfortable lifestyle wasn't as secure as they had assumed. I waited until Tuesday afternoon to return Michael's calls, timing it perfectly to coincide with what I knew would be their highest stress level. "Mom, thank God," Michael said when he answered on the first ring. "We've been trying to reach you for days." "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice warm and concerned. "I've been so busy with some personal matters. What's going on?" "Everything's falling apart," he said, and I could hear the genuine distress in his voice. "Our credit card stopped working, our car insurance was canceled, and now the mortgage company is saying there's some kind of issue with our account." "Oh my," I said, injecting surprise into my tone. "That does sound serious. What did they tell you exactly?" "They said there's been a change in the cosigner status and that we need to provide new financial documentation." "Mom, I don't understand any of this. Did you do something to the accounts?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could continue the charade, pretend ignorance, and maybe even reverse some of the changes if Michael showed genuine remorse for what had happened at his birthday party. But as I listened to his voice, I realized something important was missing from his distress. Not once had he mentioned Brittany's behavior at the party. Not once had he apologized for allowing his wife to humiliate me publicly. His concern was entirely focused on the financial consequences, not on repairing our relationship. "Michael," I said carefully, "when you called me, was there something specific you wanted to discuss about our relationship?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we haven't really talked since your birthday party. I was wondering if there was anything from that evening you wanted to address." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I don't really have time to get into relationship stuff right now. We're facing some serious financial problems here, and I need to know if you changed something with our accounts." And there it was. Even facing potential financial ruin, Michael couldn't bring himself to acknowledge what his wife had done or apologize for his own inaction. His priorities were crystal clear. "Yes, Michael," I said, my voice remaining calm and matter-of-fact. "I did make some changes to the accounts." "What? Why would you do that without telling us?" "Because they're my accounts," I replied simply. "I've been thinking about my financial responsibilities, and I've decided it's time for you and Brittany to manage your own obligations." "Mom, you can't just cut us off like this. We have a mortgage payment due this week. We have car payments. Our whole budget is based on the arrangement we've had." "The arrangement we've had," I repeated. "Michael, can you tell me what you think that arrangement was? You were helping us get established. You said you wanted to support our marriage and help us build a stable future. And I did help. For 5 years, I provided nearly $200,000 in support, but I was under the impression that this assistance came with at least basic respect and courtesy." "Mom, if this is about what Brittany said at the party, she was just stressed. You know how she gets when she's had a few drinks." I felt a familiar stab of disappointment. Even now, he was making excuses for her. "Michael, your wife called me a parasite in front of 50 people. You stood there and said nothing, not one word in my defense." I was embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. "You could have said, 'Brittany, that's my mother, and I won't allow you to speak to her that way.' You could have asked her to apologize. You could have defended the woman who has been supporting your family for 5 years. Look, I'm sorry about what happened, okay? But cutting off our financial support isn't going to solve anything. You're just making everything worse. His apology was perfunctory, delivered only because he wanted something from me. There was no genuine remorse, no understanding of how deeply he had hurt me. Michael, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm simply acknowledging reality. You and Brittany have made it clear that you don't value my presence in your lives except as a source of financial support. So I'm removing that source and freeing all of us from an unhealthy dynamic. This is crazy, Mom. You're destroying our lives over one stupid comment. One stupid comment? I repeated. Michael, this isn't about one comment. This is about 5 years of watching my relationship with my son deteriorate while I tried to buy back your affection with money. That's not fair. We love you. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you love my checkbook. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me to dinner without needing something? When was the last time you defended me when someone, even your wife, treated me disrespectfully? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had been dropped. Mom, Michael finally said, his voice quieter now. What do you want from us? It was the wrong question. He was still thinking in terms of transactions, still trying to figure out what he could give me to restore the financial support. He didn't understand that what I wanted couldn't be purchased or negotiated. I want you to be happy, Michael. And I want to be happy too. And I've realized that our current arrangement isn't making either of us happy. So what happens now? Now you and Brittany figure out how to manage your own finances. You find a way to refinance the house without my involvement. You pay your own car insurance and credit card bills. You build the independent adult life that you should have built 5 years ago. And what about us? What about our relationship? For the first time in the conversation, he sounded genuinely concerned about something other than money, but it was too little, too late. That's up to you, Michael. If you want a relationship with me that's based on mutual respect and genuine affection, I'm open to that. But if you're only interested in maintaining contact because you need financial support, then we don't really have a relationship worth preserving. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief. The conversation had confirmed what I already knew. Michael's primary concern was maintaining his lifestyle, not repairing our relationship. But it also marked the end of a chapter in my life that had been weighing me down for years. I was no longer Michael's financial safety net, no longer responsible for maintaining a relationship that only flowed in one direction. The phone rang again an hour later. This time, it was Brittany. Eleanor, we need to talk, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Hello, Brittany, I replied calmly. What you're doing is vindictive and cruel. You're trying to destroy our marriage because you can't handle the fact that Michael has a wife now. I almost smiled at her attempt to reframe the situation. Even facing financial crisis, she couldn't resist trying to manipulate the narrative. Brittany, I'm simply choosing not to subsidize people who don't respect me. One comment at a party, and you're willing to ruin our lives? It wasn't one comment, Brittany. It was 5 years of comments. 5 years of being treated like an unwelcome intruder in my own son's life. You're delusional if you think Michael is going to choose you over me. And there it was, the heart of Brittany's worldview. She saw our relationship as a competition, with Michael as the prize to be won. I'm not asking Michael to choose anyone, I said. I'm simply removing myself from a situation that has become unhealthy for everyone involved. The call ended with Brittany screaming threats about lawyers and lawsuits, none of which concerned me. Everything I had done was legal and well documented. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset and feeling truly peaceful for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for Michael and Brittany, but they would face them without me. I was finally free. 3 months later, I stood in the living room of my new townhouse in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching the movers arrange the last of my furniture. The space was smaller than my old house, but it felt infinitely larger. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every book had been chosen because it brought me joy, not because it impressed anyone else. The moving process had been surprisingly liberating. Going through 40 years of accumulated possessions, I found myself asking a simple question about each item. Does this serve the life I want to live now? Anything that reminded me of disappointment or obligation went to charity. What remained was clean, purposeful, and entirely mine. My new home was part of an active adult community, filled with people who had also reached the stage of life where authenticity mattered more than appearances. Within the first week, I had joined a book club, signed up for pottery classes, and made plans to volunteer at the local animal shelter. For the first time in years, my calendar was full of activities I actually wanted to do. The contrast with my old life was stark. No more waiting for phone calls that never came. No more carefully planned visits that were canceled at the last minute. No more walking on eggshells around people who were supposed to love me. Instead, I had neighbors who invited me for coffee because they enjoyed my company, not because they needed something from me. I had been following Michael and Brittany's situation from a distance through social media and occasional updates from mutual acquaintances. The picture that emerged was exactly what I had expected. Within 6 weeks of losing my financial support, they had been forced to put their house on the market. Without my income supporting the mortgage, they couldn't qualify for refinancing. The house sold quickly, but after paying off the mortgage and associated fees, they were left with very little equity. They moved into a small apartment across town, and Brittany was forced to find her first full-time job in years. According to my former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who still kept in touch, Brittany was working as a receptionist at a dental office and was frequently complaining about the long hours and demanding patients. Michael's business had struggled without the loan I had provided. He was forced to take on a partner who demanded significant control in exchange for the capital injection needed to keep the company operational. The independence and control he had enjoyed were gone, replaced by the reality of answering to someone who prioritized profits over his creative vision. But the most telling detail came from Sarah, Michael's college friend, who had reached out to check on me after learning about my move. According to Sarah, the financial stress had created significant tension in Michael and Brittany's marriage. The comfortable lifestyle that had masked their fundamental incompatibilities was gone, and they were discovering what their relationship looked like without external support. Brittany keeps asking Michael when you're going to come to your senses and help them out again, Sarah told me during a phone call. She seems to think this is all some kind of temporary punishment that will end once you've made your point. I wasn't surprised. People like Brittany never believed that their actions had permanent consequences. She had spent so many years manipulating situations to her advantage that she couldn't conceive of encountering a problem she couldn't charm or guilt her way out of. And Michael? I asked. He's different, Sarah said carefully. Quieter. I think he's starting to understand what he lost, but he's too proud to admit it. Pride. That was the family trait that had always been Michael's weakness. Even as a child, he would rather suffer in silence than admit he had made a mistake. It was a quality I had once thought showed strength of character, but I now recognized as a fundamental inability to take responsibility for his choices. The closest thing to contact I had with my old life came through occasional text messages from Michael. They arrived every few weeks, usually late at night, and followed a predictable pattern. Hope you're doing well in Arizona. Thinking about you today. Miss talking to you. Each message was carefully crafted to sound affectionate, without actually acknowledging what had happened between us. There was never an apology for Brittany's behavior, never an admission that he had failed to defend me, never a genuine attempt to address the issues that had driven me away. I responded to each message politely but briefly. Thank you. I'm doing well. Hope you're both healthy. Take care. I wasn't cruel, but I also wasn't going to pretend that everything was fine between us. The messages stopped coming after I didn't respond to his Christmas text. Even Michael's pride had limits, apparently. But my new life wasn't defined by what I had left behind. It was shaped by what I had discovered about myself. At 67, I was learning things about my own interests and capabilities that had been buried under decades of putting other people's needs first. The pottery classes revealed an artistic side I never knew I possessed. My instructor, a woman named Janet, who had retired from a successful career as a psychologist, became my first real friend in Arizona. We spent hours talking about the challenges of redefining yourself after spending decades in service to others. The hardest part, Janet told me one afternoon as we worked on our pottery wheels, is learning that you don't have to earn your place in people's lives. You deserve love and respect simply because you exist, not because of what you can provide. Her words resonated deeply. I had spent so many years trying to prove my worth through my actions, supporting Michael financially, organizing family gatherings, always being available when needed, that I had forgotten that love shouldn't require constant demonstration of value. The animal shelter work brought its own revelations. Working with abandoned dogs and cats, I saw my own story reflected in animals who had been discarded by people who were supposed to care for them. But I also saw their capacity for healing, their willingness to trust again when shown genuine kindness. One dog in particular, a 7-year-old golden retriever named Max, had been surrendered by his family when they decided he was too much trouble to keep. He was perfectly healthy and well-trained, but his owners had grown tired of the responsibility. Max spent his first weeks at the shelter withdrawn and depressed, clearly unable to understand why his family had abandoned him. I started spending extra time with Max and gradually watched him begin to trust again. The day he was adopted by a retired couple who clearly adored him, I cried tears of joy. His story had a happy ending, and so did mine. As I settled into my new routine, I realized that the best revenge against people who had undervalued me wasn't anger or bitterness. It was living a life so full and satisfying that their absence was irrelevant. Every morning I woke up grateful for the day ahead. Every evening I went to bed content with how I had spent my time. On the first anniversary of Michael's birthday party, the night that had changed everything, I hosted a dinner party for 6 of my new friends. We ate, laughed, and shared stories late into the evening. As I looked around my dining room table at these women who had welcomed me into their circle without requiring anything except friendship, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had thought losing my family would leave me alone and bitter. Instead, it had freed me to discover what genuine relationships felt like. I had learned that family isn't always defined by blood, that love doesn't require constant sacrifice, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. The woman who had stood silently in that country club ballroom, absorbing public humiliation rather than cause a scene, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than respect. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying ending of all.